Riley Everyday is back with a brand new series counting down the top 10 most intriguing teams ahead of the 25-26 season. And I'm looking specifically at programs with heavy roster turnover that could lead to a variety of different outcomes. I've got some very special guests helping me break it all down. Can't wait for y'all to hear them. And we're back on Riley every day as we count down the top 10 most intriguing teams for the upcoming season. And today, I am joined by Zion Brown, who has covered Indiana the past few years. He is an alumni of Indiana. So, really excited to talk about this team. We were talking a little bit off air. I didn't realize this until I started prepping, but there is not a single returning scholarship player for the Hoosiers this year, Zion. Like Coach DeVries came in and
Yeah.
immediately retooled the roster. What are the vibes like even among Indiana fans right now?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Riley. And I think it's so much different than even just 4 years ago when it was Mike Woodson's first year. You're still in the transfer portal era then, and you're bringing in new guys like Miller Kopp and Parker Stewart at the time. But then you still have Race Thompson, Trace Jackson Davis, guys like that returning. And so that was even the changes that we've seen throughout college basketball in just 4 years, where it's just like, okay, 4 years ago, it would kind of be like a half and half when you had a coaching turnover. Now, at Indiana, at least, it is a completely new roster. So I think a lot of people are just kind of hesitant to lean into these guys because they don't
Mm.
know them yet,
Hmm.
right? And you've got to now it's turned into a bit of a football school, quote unquote, right? Where people are really excited for football to start in the upcoming week. So for these next few months, I don't know how much chatter there will be about this men's
Mm.
basketball team that people don't seem to know very well. But then, of course, once the season gets going, people will, you know, kind of craft out who their favorite players are, what guys they like, what guys they maybe want to see play less, and whatnot.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, and so you graduated from Indiana 2023, 24,
Fine, just here this year.
2025. Oh, congrats. I didn't realize you were that
Thank you.
recent of a grad. So, yeah, you were there up close and personal for the Woodson era. And at least from my vantage point, it seems like just watching those clips from Puerto Rico, there's this new energy around the team. And I don't want to take away from Trace Jackson Davis. You know, I feel like if you look at Woodson's tenure as largely a disappointment, or we could even use the word failure, I think when you consider Indiana's their standards historically speaking, TJD that one season was like, man, watching him dominate and be a National Player of the Year candidate was like, I loved the way that he grew as a passer and a playmaker. However, still, even just watching the clips from the Puerto Rico trip, you just see a different style of offense being played, a ton more threes. It seems like there are more skilled players who can dribble, pass, and shoot just up and down the roster than we've seen in recent years. But I'm curious, did you tune in much for those Puerto Rico highlights, or even what's the pulse from in the fan base after that?
Yeah, like you, I caught a lot of the highlights. There was literally nowhere to watch the games live.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you weren't there, you weren't actually getting the full scope of whatever it was that was going on down there. But I would agree. It felt like I saw a lot of like hot potato type of plays offensively where the ball is just bouncing around. Maybe not always leading to something like a great shot or anything like that, but you could just tell that in this Darren DeVries era, this team wants to kind of just move the ball around at a quicker pace and a much faster pace than they did in the Woodson era, where it was kind of setting it up for one guy to get to his spot and operate, whether that was Trace Jackson Davis, whether that was Malik New, whether that was even a guard like Xavier Johnson
Mm.
or Miles Price or Rice last year, right? So it's definitely a different style of play that I think this team is going into the year with. And I think it's also team specific, right? One thing that kind of has stuck out to me about Darren DeVries is that every year his teams play a little differently. And I think he's a guy that he just wants some semblance of talent and then he figures it out based off what he has on his team. I don't think he's somebody who's like, okay, we're always going to be moving the ball and
Right.
passing the ball all the time, or we're always going to be posting up or doing this. But this is a team that doesn't have the best self creators, I'd say. And so the
Hmm.
ball is probably going to try to be moved around quite a bit to generate the best offense.
I think that's a really good point, even on the ball movement. We'll talk a lot stylistically as we get through categories, but even looking at his resume, those 2 years where he had Tucker at his best, 2023, 2024, or excuse me, Drake's assist rate was like in the, oh, actually, I guess I misread something. This was 2022 where it was 331st, 2023, 201st. But that last year with Tucker, it was in the top 60. He's had a couple other times where they've been top 70 for assist rate. So it seems like ball movement has been close to a premium, even though I would say there's a few outlier years there where I thought maybe with Tucker being one of the more high usage guys in the country, that it was a little bit of his show to run. And like you said, that stylistically, I'm very curious to see what he does with this roster. And we can start by talking about Tucker because, in my opinion, I kind of want to zig a little bit here, but I think he will be the most impactful newcomer, especially if we get like the 2024 version of Tucker before the injury. Like this was a dude who was on draft boards 2 years ago, who I thought had a legit chance, like probably not to get drafted, but to at least be in the conversation for a second round pick, get a summer league invite, maybe earn a two-way at some point. And he seems to be slept on, even though he had some moments last year, even before the injury, where it looked like he could translate moving up a level. I think at his best, he is a knockdown movement shooter. He has the size to bully smaller guards and dribble into the post, and he does really crafty footwork once he gets there. Not to mention, he's just, I would say, has a little better burst and more explosive in the lane than I think the casual fan would realize just by looking at a white dude named Tucker who's a coach's son, you know? So, but I'm curious, Zion, who do you think will be the most impactful newcomer on this team?
I agree that it will be Tucker DeVries, right? This is a guy that's just proven. You look at his last season at Drake on that tournament team, and the way he averaged north of 20 points, and you looked at the way at the beginning of the season, it stinks that right he didn't get to finish off the season, and I guess for Indiana fans it doesn't stink because that granted him an extra year of eligibility.
Yeah.
But you look at it and the way that him and Javon Small were playing together to start that year, and it was kind of like this nice little tandem between the two of them that had DeVries been healthy throughout the whole season, I mean, there's almost no doubt that West Virginia would have just been in the tournament, right? They were right there
Mhm.
anyway. And if they were both healthy, you have kind of two all Big 12 level players. That team is probably safely in the tournament and could maybe make some noise in it. So he's a guy, once again, he's shown what he can do. Like you said, he's kind of been fringe drafts on some fringe draft boards here and there. Not sure if that's really where his future lies after this year at IU, but whether or not that is what his future is, I do think he can be, one of the more impactful players in the Big Ten. So I have him as the most impactful newcomer. And once again, when you're talking about most impactful newcomer on this team, you're just talking about whoever the most impactful player is, because there's not a returner on
Yeah, that's a good
scholarship.
point.
And so for me, it's DeVries, and then I could see Lamar Wilkerson. I could
Mhm.
see a world where as that shifty, quick guard and a guy who can shoot the ball really well, where he's kind of the leading scorer and top two or three in assists on the team as well, and he's really the
Mhm.
best player on this team.
Yeah, Wilkerson I think would be the popular pick just because the pull-up shooting is so enticing, and you see he's another guy who's averaged over 20 points per game last season. But I think I just want to give the slight edge to the player with Tucker, who, even though his season was cut short, even though he had the season-ending injury, at least has some reps going against high-level competition. He's played in the NCAA tournament before and played against a high-level non-conference slate before the injury last year at West Virginia. He feels if safe might be a stretch just because we don't know exactly what form he will be at following the injury, but he does feel slightly more of a sure bet to translate up a level than Wilkerson for me. We can move on next to the player we see being the biggest swing factor. I'll let you go first on this one.
To me, this is Tate Conaway, the Troy
Oh,
transfer,
okay. Let
because
me hear about him.
he'll be in this starting lineup. It's going to be kind of a three, maybe even a four guard starting lineup, and we'll probably get to that later when we talk about another topic you have lined up here. But when you look at Conaway, he averaged 14, 5, and 5 basically last year at Troy, which is those aren't really numbers you see in college basketball a lot, right? You don't really see guys that can kind of score, rebound, and assist at a decent enough level to really get those numbers. And of course, it's at
Mhm.
Troy. That's why he's kind of the swing guy, right? If he had done this at Michigan or something like that, he might be in the NBA right now.
Yeah,
But
right.
so this is somebody who I'm really interested in watching and seeing, okay, can this translate to the Big Ten level, right? He's not a great shooter, but I think this team has plenty of that. He's a guy that you kind of want to be that connective playmaker, right? He can play off of Wilkerson and DeVries and just play make from the inside the arc, rebound,
Mhm.
pass, and just do all these different things for this team. Also led the Sun Belt in steals, averaged almost 3 steals a game last year at Troy. So once again, he's just kind of like this chess piece. It's like, okay, where can we move him? How can we utilize him? And if he can produce at a similar level that he did at Troy or something like that, scaling up to the Big Ten level, and you're saying, okay, this is really one of the most unique and kind of most versatile players in all of college basketball.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Conway. I would say I'm a believer in him, even though I don't think there's a huge sample size of Sunbelt up transfers who really lit it up. But kind of like you're saying, if DeVries returns to form and if Wilkerson hits, he's playing a more ancillary role anyway. I love how integral he was to Troy's their midseason turnaround last year. You know, they began the season at 11-7, and they won 12 of their final 15 games to take over and get into the tournament. And during that stretch over their final 15 games, he averaged over 16 points per game. You mentioned it, close to 6 rebounds, close to 5 assists as well. Just a really well-rounded dude. And I think, you know, you saw this in those Puerto Rico clips. He will pressure ball handlers the length of the court. And I think just some of that feistiness, some of that intensity, like that can earn his spot even more so. And I look at him thinking like, okay, he probably does have that one position on lock. Like there's question marks, I think, up and down the 2 through the 4, I would say, for a couple different guys who could emerge. I mean, honestly, it seems like Connerway, Wilkerson, DeVries would be locks to start somewhere at the like 2 through 4, but or excuse me, the 1, 2, and 3. Maybe you move DeVries down to the 4, and there's that one spot that's up for grabs. But yeah, I think he seems like a pretty sure bet. He's one of the guys I say I feel better about translating up a level. For me, I said Reed Bailey as the biggest swing piece. He's someone when you watch the tape, the skill pops. I mean, he's a wizard in the pinch post, really, really gifted passer, just has tremendous vision and touch. I mean, good footwork, good touch around the basket as well. Shot isn't the prettiest, but it went in at a 41% clip last year, albeit on a lower volume. And he got to the free throw line a ton. Both the last 2 years at Davidson, he drew a ton of fouls, which I like that he can play a little more physically. And it remains to be seen, though. Like I call him the swing piece because, well, for a couple reasons. First, you know, you're looking at the starting lineup. There's a world of different perimeter players who I think could have a variety of roles. When you look at Alexa Ristich, Nick Dorn, Connor Enright, like any Josiah Miles, those dudes, I wouldn't be surprised if out of that 4, any of them were starters, if any of them were essentially like 5 to 10 minutes to outside of the rotation. You know, there's a high variety of outcomes there, but I trust that like just the sheer number of bodies, someone will emerge, someone will stick. Whereas when you look at Bailey, if it's not him, you're having to lean heavily on Sam Alexis at the 5. And I like what I saw from him in the Puerto Rico clips. I think even when he committed to Florida last year, he fit a lot of what Todd Golden looked for in terms of bigs who could pass and bigs who were going to get on the offensive glass. It just didn't work out there. I don't think he could really hold up defensively, which makes me super worried if you have to lean on him for big minutes at the 5. So Bailey needs to hit, and I see a world where there is. But there's also the athleticism concerns. He only had 14 dunks last year, 58% at the rim, despite his size advantage and playing in a league that's not exactly known for athleticism in the A10. And then just it comes down to Davidson. When you look at the track record, there just haven't been too many players who look good outside of the system that the McKillops have run for decades now. It's like Steph Curry, Kellen Grady, and that's it. I mean, Sam Meninga, Peyton Aldridge, Hyunjung Lee, other guys who had NBA buzz at some point in their Davidson careers who we haven't heard from in years. So that's my fear for Reed Bailey.
I like that answer. And like you said, they are going to need him with the lack of center depth on this team. I just worry, like you said, the athleticism concerns do indeed worry me. And you look at the way Reed Bailey played last year against kind of higher level competition, it was a lot different than his stats against
Mm.
those A10 teams that Davidson played. And you've got a team, right, like Purdue that IU is going to have to face twice this year, where you've got guys like Trey Kaufman-Renn obviously down low, Oscar Clough, and
Hmm.
Daniel Jacobson. You know, it's just going to be like, hey, obviously you don't expect him to really be better than those guys, specifically Clough and Kaufman-Renn, but it's like, can you hold up just enough to really give IU a chance to win in games like that? And that's the big question mark. So he's definitely a huge swing player for sure coming in this year.
I will say shout out to Indiana social teams for when they put together the Puerto Rico clips. They gave him a highlight where he looked like Danny Wolf, where he was taking the ball up the court and like got into the paint and kicked it out to the corner. We had a couple Indiana fans in the Sleepers Discord being like, "There's our Danny Wolf right there." I'm like, "Hey, y'all hang on to that hope. I hope it works out for you."
Right.
I mean, if you're looking for like I guess the archetype to fit, you point to Danny Wolf, an up transfer from another league in the Ivy that has had very few success stories when they move up to the power conferences, and he made that look easy. Where same concerns. I want to say Danny Wolf had less dunks than Reed Bailey his last year at Yale. Like his around the basket numbers were pretty bleak, and they found a way to make it work. So perhaps that works out as well for Reed Bailey. But what do you think the biggest strength for this team will be?
I think it has to be the shooting, right? I mean,
Hmm.
there's just so many talented shooters on this team. When you look at a guy like Nick Dorn, we already talked about DeVries and Wilkerson, of course, but a guy like Nick Dorn who shot the ball well last year coming from Elon. Trent Sisley, a freshman who it seems like he's going to play, right? Based on what we saw. Everybody played in Puerto Rico for the most part, but based off what we saw as far as the minutes that he got, he seems like a guy that coming into this year, I didn't really know. And obviously we're still months away from the season starting, but I didn't really know if he was going to automatically be in that lineup. It looks like he has really impressed the DeVries coaching staff. And so it seems like he will play. And so you've got guys on this team who should be able to shoot the ball really well. That was clearly the main emphasis in the transfer portal once Darren DeVries got to Bloomington, right? He clearly emphasized that over really size or defense. He really just wants a team that can shoot. Again, I'll say with Darren DeVries, his teams up until last year weren't really high volume 3-point shooting teams. But once again, he
Mm.
got a roster last season at West Virginia that he said, okay, we've got shooters on this team. Let's let it fly. And they did that. And so I expect to kind of see something similar with Indiana this team. I think they actually have probably better shooters this year at IU than they had at West Virginia last year, especially after Tucker DeVries went down for the Mountaineers last year. And so shooting should be the main strength of this team. I think they can end up winning a lot of games where they're outmatched just because they end up making, 13 threes to the other team's seven.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it like they were letting it fly in Puerto Rico to where, I mean, they have the bodies to do so. Like you're getting at, I think Wilkerson and DeVries both seem like sure bets. I mean, Wilkerson might be a little bit streakier. I think there's a chance that he might end up being a gunner. But I think there's probably going to be nights where he hits 5 or 6. There might be some nights where he goes 2 for 10 or something. But I think between like DeVries and Dorn, you have two guys who you should be able to bank on as well. With Dorn, though, I actually did want to ask you a little bit about him. What, because in interacting with Indiana fans, again, in our Sleepers Discord or just online, they seem like a player. He seems like a player that IU fans are higher on. I watched him in person against UNC last year at Elon. He lit Carolina up, hit 5 threes in the Dean Dome. However, when I look at his numbers, it doesn't seem like he did a ton other than shoot threes last year. Only attempted 72 twos on the season. Actually, his free throw rate isn't quite as bad as you would expect for someone who took so few twos. But yeah, where are you at on Dorn and his potential impact this year?
I think he's a nice bench piece, right? I'm not expecting this guy to just light it up consistently, but
Hmm.
like you said, he could come in a game. He took 8 threes a game last year, right? And
Beautiful.
I doubt he'll be playing 31 minutes, and I'm certain that he won't be able to shoot the ball 11 or 12 times a game like he did at Elon. But
Hmm.
if he could come in certain games and just shoot 8 threes and make 3 to 5, and you're like, whoa, that just won us the game, right? Those 22
Right.
minutes from Nick Dorn just won us the game. Like, I don't think that is out of the realm of possibilities for what he can be this year. Probably not a guy you expect to have a high impact defensively. Average, look at that stats right now. Average 0.3 steals a game. That is extremely low, right? In the CAA at that. So like
Hmm.
that's probably going to keep him from getting significant minutes consistently on this Indiana team. But if you can trust in his shooting and the fact that this year he should probably get more spot up looks than he got at Elon, then that's kind of where his role is. I'm not super high on him, but I'm not like low on him either.
Hmm.
I don't see him as a player who won't be in the rotation, but I may also see him as somebody who is starting and playing significant minutes every game. And he has some undisclosed injury, so he didn't even play in Puerto Rico. But from what I've heard, I don't believe this should really carry into the season. I hope it doesn't, and I think he should be ready to go day one.
Yeah, yeah. I would say he's of the newcomers, one of the guys I was more bearish on just because of like him not doing a ton other than shooting threes at this point in his career and some of the efficiency concerns even with that. However, I don't think Elon ever said officially what the injury was he suffered last year that just was like a lower extremity injury or something like that. But so you do see his numbers, I mean, just tank after he started dealing with that, which eventually ended his season. But even what you're saying about him being like a spot up guy, like he has the freedom to be a 3-point specialist on this team, and I would say that ties into my biggest strength for the Hoosiers this year, and that's role allocation. I think that DeVries kind of has his work laid out for him in a way that I see the vision where, you're playing through Tucker. He's the offensive go-getter, the engine, and you have Wilkerson sort of flanking him as these two high-level shot makers. We mentioned Wilkerson's pull-up shooting and how integral that could be to Indiana's success. You have Connerway who's there to facilitate, play defense, be that point of attack defender. Bailey, I think you can run offense through in spurts. Last year was really the first year we saw a DeVries team play through its bigs more when you had Amani Hansberry, who took a huge leap in terms of just his ability to facilitate from the top of the key or out of the pinch post. And then after that, you have guys like Dorn who can be that shooting specialist, Enright, the change of pace guy. I would say Enright, like, I don't know if he'll play more than 15 minutes a game. Like I'd be hoping that either Miles or Dorn or someone takes or Ristich takes a step forward to limit his role. But he's got pretty good first step, can create paint touches, and obviously a great passer. Like really good backup point guard in an ideal world if IU does hit their ceiling. So there's just I think it's a roster that should yield itself naturally to figure out like who they are. Everybody knows what's expected of them. And you have two guys in Wilkerson and Tuck who you can lean on in crunch time or when the shot clock's winding down to go get a bucket. So yeah, that's the biggest strength to me. We can move on to the biggest concern. Where are you at on this team? What's your biggest question mark for the Hoosiers?
I mean, we already talked about it with Bailey, but just in general, I think it's the big man and the it's not even that they're not big, they're not super long either, right? There's not a lot of
Mhm.
guys who are like 6'7" and lengthy type of guys. And I think that was a concern for this team in Puerto Rico when they went down those two games to Super Bet, the Mega Super Bet team. I had to remember the name off the top of my head. That's a tough name to remember, but yeah, the Mega Super Bet team. They went down in the second and third game. They played that team twice, and they went down big in both of those games. And that is a team with some athletes. I think they've got a guy who is projected to maybe be a first round NBA pick next year. And Indiana struggled at the beginning of those games. They won both of them. They came back to win, so they went 3-0 in Puerto Rico. But I think just against those A, taller and B, longer teams, this team
Mhm.
could find themselves just struggling quite a bit with that size and length, right? And then you find yourself maybe forcing up threes as your only hope, which you would prefer the threes that you get to be good looks rather than just shooting them because those are the only looks speaking really good, right? Because I can see this being a world where the Hoosiers just can't really penetrate enough to put a
Mhm.
lot of pressure on defenses, and they're just taking a lot of contested or like slightly contested 3-point shots that aren't really great shots in the grand scheme of things. So the size and the length are huge concerns, and I think this coaching staff would probably acknowledge that, right? I don't think it's a secret necessarily with this team, right? The goal this year isn't to win the national championship or anything anyway. And so
Mhm.
I think that is kind of the main thing you look at with this specific roster and say, okay, there are going to be games against certain teams and just certain nights where they're just outmatched from an athletic and from a strength standpoint.
Yeah, you worded that a lot more eloquently and a lot more thought out than my concern. Mine was just so many up transfers, which you hit on the biggest concerns with up transfers. Usually, though, it is those athletic limitations. It's being a little more limited physically, not the size that you're going to see from power conference players. I will say to IU's advantage, I mean, we've hit on this all throughout this interview. Like they bring in a brand new roster. So at least they're taking a lot of cracks at it. They're taking a bunch of swings. You got to hit on a couple. But at the end of the day, there's the voice in the back of my head that's cautioning any sort of optimism toward the Hoosiers here, where it's like there's a world where all these guys just aren't good enough and the floor is
Hmm.
way lower. And we'll get to this with ceiling and floor. I believe this team hits its ceiling. I just don't think it's super high. I think DeVries is a floor raiser. He's been that way throughout his career. I from a more macro level picture, I don't know if he has the juice, the personality to be the Indiana coach and be successful, just what's expected of you at that job. But I do think he's a really good basketball coach. I'm just not sure he's going to be the one to push IU back to like national relevance where you can be top 10, top 15 year in, year out, which I'm sorry. I don't mean to be negative to the Indiana fans. That's just trying to be a little bit just a little bit analytical here and surveying what kind of guy he is from a personality standpoint even. But I think, X's and O's, roster building, he's been really good at that throughout his career. And I think he'll get Indiana to be like somewhere in that 6, 7, 8, 9 seed range where maybe they win a game, bow out gracefully in the round of 32. You're probably happy with that, and you hope to build a little bit more on that heading into his second season.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's kind of what the optimistic viewpoint of this team is being a 6 or 7 seed, right? Being somewhere in that range, and once again, defensively, I just don't see this being like a super high quality defensive team. So the hope is that offensively, there's enough talent, there's
Mhm.
enough, schematic changes where really DeVries' new scheme can come in and really change the way this team runs its offense. And then maybe it's a top 15 to 20 offense in the country. And that's kind of like the high end of things for this Indiana team. I
Mhm.
could I could see that happening this year. It just has to come together correctly for these guys. And I think you're going to need probably for that to happen too. One of these freshmen to hit. I already talked about Trent Sisley, and then you got Alex Ristich coming in, a Serbian guy, right? So he played some players I think he was used to playing against in Serbia in that Puerto
Mhm.
Rico slate. He got some playing time there too. So if one of those two really hits, and when I say hit, they don't necessarily have to start, but prove that they're a really impactful player. I think that may change this team as well.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Sicily, I thought was super impressive in the highlights we saw from Puerto Rico, and his box score looked great. So he might earn a bigger role than expected. I'm excited to watch him. As a whole, anytime you have a team with a brand as big as Indiana, ushering in a new coach, bunch of new players, it always makes for fascinating content, fascinating product as well. So we will be locked in, seeing how the Hoosiers do in year one under Darian DeFries. Zion, again, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate
Thanks
talking
for
ball,
having
my
me.
man. Of course, dude. And Riley Everyday is brought to you by Rowback, my go-to for performance gear. They've got hoodies, polos, quarter zips, athletic shirts, and shorts. Whatever you need, they have you covered. As you can see, I am wearing the Hezi Performance hoodie, and I love this hoodie so much. It is so comfortable and versatile. It's great for casual wear. It's great for active wear. Make sure to get yourself one and use promo code SleepersMedia20 for 20% off your first order over at rowback.com.